Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment. I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I never planned on moving into a house like this. In fact, I never planned on moving at all. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. A few months ago, I was living in a nice apartment with my wife, building a life we thought would last. Then came the divorce, swift and brutal. Suddenly, I was alone, forced to start over in a town I barely knew. That's how I ended up here, standing in front of a weathered old house with peeling paint and sagging shutters, my meager belongings packed in a rented moving truck. The house was cheap, suspiciously so, but I didn't ask too many questions. I needed a fresh start, and this place, despite its eerie exterior, was as good as any. The inside was just as time-worn as the outside. The floors groaned under every step, the air carried a faint mustiness, and the wallpaper was stained with years of neglect. Still, it had character, ornate wooden banisters, a fireplace in the living room, and a sprawling attic that I wasn't quite ready to explore. I spent the first day unpacking, filling the empty rooms with my sparse furniture. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dusty windows, I felt a peculiar sense of unease settle over me. I chalked it up to exhaustion. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence of the house was almost oppressive. Then came the sounds, soft at first, like the house settling. A creak here, a shuffle there. I told myself it was normal, that old houses made noise. But as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I woke to a dull ache in my back, the kind that comes from sleeping in a bed that isn't quite yours yet. The air in the house felt stale, as if it hadn't been breathed in for a long time. I pushed the feeling aside and went about my day, making coffee and stepping outside for a breath of fresh air. That's when I met her, Mrs. Callahan, my next-door neighbor. She was an older woman, small-framed with sharp eyes that seemed to see through me. She stood at the edge of her porch, holding a watering can, watching me in that way people do when they're debating whether or not to say something. "You're the new tenant," she finally said. "Yeah, just moved in yesterday." I forced a polite smile. She didn't return it. Instead, she took a step closer, lowering her voice. "People don't stay in that house for long." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She nodded. "Last one ran out in the middle of the night. Left everything behind. Before that, a woman lived there alone. Started losing her mind. Said she heard things at night. Footsteps, whispers. She left, too." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "Old houses make noise," I said, forcing a chuckle. Mrs. Callahan didn't laugh. "Maybe, but that house, it's got a history. Built by a man named Emmett Graves. They say he was into things he shouldn't have been." A breeze rustled through the trees, and I suddenly felt exposed standing there, the weight of the house pressing against my back. I cleared my throat. Well, I'm not superstitious. Mrs. Callahan just gave me a knowing look. "Maybe you should be..." She turned and disappeared into her house, leaving me standing there with my coffee gone cold and an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I shook it off and went back inside, telling myself that small towns love their ghost stories. That night, though, I wasn't so sure. The sound started again, faint creaks at first, then a slow, deliberate step across the upstairs hallway. I sat up in bed, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house was empty. I knew that, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was walking just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped. A long silence stretched out, so thick it felt like the air itself was pressing down on me. Then, just as I was about to convince myself it was nothing, I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible. A whisper. My blood turned to ice. The sound was so quiet, I couldn't make out the words, but I felt them brush against my skin like a cold breath in the dark. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen in place. My mind racing through every logical explanation, whined through the walls. Pipes? My own exhaustion playing tricks on me? Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the house fell silent again. I didn't sleep that night, and I was no longer sure I was alone. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream, a half-waking hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. It had to be. There was no other explanation that didn't make me sound like the people Mrs. Callahan had warned me about, the ones who left in the middle of the night. Still, I found myself moving a little faster as I got ready for the day, checking over my shoulder as if expecting something or someone to be standing there. I decided to distract myself by exploring the town. It was small, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. The grocery store was family-owned. The gas station still had a full-service option, and there was a single diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. I grabbed a booth by the window and ordered coffee, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the night before. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, poured my cup and gave me a curious glance. "You the one who moved into the old Graves house?" I stiffened. "Yeah." "Why?" She shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just don't get too comfortable." I frowned. "You believe in all that nonsense." She sighed, setting the coffee pot down. "I don't believe in much, but I know what I've seen. You ever notice how cheap that house was?" I hesitated. "Yeah, that's 'cause it don't want to be lived in. People try, but it always finds a way to get rid of them." Something about the way she said it, like the house itself was alive, sent a chill down my spine. I forced a chuckle. Well, I'm not scared of a few creaky floorboards. She just shook her head and walked away. That night, I lay in bed, telling myself I wouldn't let my imagination get the best of me. I kept the lamp on, the soft yellow light spilling into the shadows. For a while, everything was quiet. Then, just as I started to relax, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. They moved down the hallway, pausing just outside my door. I held my breath, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might shake the bed. The knob rattled. Not the wind. Not the house settling. Someone was trying to turn it. I shot up, grabbing the closest thing I could find, a lamp from the nightstand. My mind raced. There had to be an explanation. A break-in? A prank? Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knob stilled. Silence. I sat there, gripping the lamp like a weapon, waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. I didn't sleep. And by morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. But what disturbed me most was the realization I had when I finally got up to check the door. The knob never turned. It had been locked from the inside. I barely made it through the next day. Every little sound in the house made me jump. The ticking of the clock, the wind rattling the old windows, even my own footsteps. Sleep-deprived and jittery, I told myself I needed to get a grip. But how could I, when the house kept proving that something was wrong? I spent the morning inspecting every lock, every window, checking for signs that someone had broken in. Nothing. Everything was exactly as I had left it. No forced entry. No footprints on the dusty floor. No logical explanation. The weight of it pressed on me. A nagging sense of paranoia that refused to let go. I needed a break. Some air. I stepped outside and nearly ran into Mrs. Callahan. She stood at the edge of my yard, arms crossed, watching my house like it might lunge at her. "You heard them, didn't you?" she asked. I hesitated. "Heard what?" She scoffed. "Don't play dumb." The footsteps, the whispers, a chill ran through me. "You know about that. Everybody does." She nodded toward the house. Emmett Graves built that place, but he wasn't the last to live there. Back in the 50s, a family moved in, parents and their little girl. They didn't last long. I swallowed hard. What happened? The girl started talking to someone, said he lived in the walls. At first, they thought it was an imaginary friend. Mrs. Callahan's face darkened. Then she started waking up with scratches on her arms. Said he didn't like when she ignored him. My stomach twisted. What happened to her? Mrs. Callahan sighed. One night, she disappeared. Vanished without a trace. Parents swore up and down that she was taken, but the doors were locked. Windows shut. No forced entry. Just like you. The air felt too thick, like it was pressing against my lungs. They found her diary, she continued. Pages filled with drawings. A tall man with no face. Long arms. Hollow eyes. I felt my skin crawl. And you're saying he's still here? Mrs. Callahan met my gaze. I'm saying you should leave before you find out. I laughed, short, nervous. I'm not running from shadows. She shook her head. Neither did they. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, the house looming behind me like a beast waiting to swallow me whole. That night, I told myself I wouldn't let her words get to me, but deep down, I knew they already had. I went to bed with every light on, lying stiffly under the covers listening. And then at exactly 3:12 a.m., something changed. The air grew thick, suffocating. The temperature dropped, so suddenly I could see my breath. Then came the sound. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Slow. Labored. Right next to my bed. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision, just outside the halo of my bedside lamp. My throat went dry. I didn't want to look. I couldn't look. Then the mattress dipped, like someone was sitting on the edge. My body locked up. My mind screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. The breathing grew louder, closer, and then in the cold, suffocating silence, I felt it. A hand pressing down on my chest. I gasped, the weight crushing the air from my lungs. My vision blurred. My body refused to move. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The weight lifted. The air cleared. I sat up, gasping. The room empty. The house silent. But I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone, because the last thing I heard before dawn was a whisper, right against my ear. Asterisk, you should have left. Asterisk, I left the house the next morning. I didn't pack a bag, didn't brush my teeth, didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I just grabbed my keys and walked straight to my car, hands shaking so bad I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I had to get out. I drove without a destination, just putting miles between me and whatever was inside that house. My thoughts were a mess. My brain caught in a loop of what had happened the night before. The hand, the pressure on my chest, the whisper, I should have left. The problem was, I had. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. It was still with me. I found myself back at the diner. It wasn't a conscious decision, but when I saw the familiar neon sign buzzing weakly in the morning light, I pulled into the lot and stumbled inside. The waitress from before, the one who had warned me, saw me immediately. Her expression darkened. "Sit," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I obeyed, collapsing into the booth. She poured me a cup of coffee, watching me closely. "You saw it, didn't you?" I gripped the warm mug with both hands, trying to stop the shaking. "I don't know what I saw." My voice was hoarse. She let out a slow breath. "It touches you when it likes you." My stomach turned. What the hell does that mean? She sat down across from me, something I doubted she did for just anyone. Most folks who stay in that house hear things. Footsteps, voices, maybe even see a shadow now and then, but only a few get closer to it. I swallowed hard. "You mean..." She nodded. "You're in its sights now." A shiver ran down my spine. "How do I get rid of it?" She hesitated. "You don't..." That answer hit me like a brick. There has to be something. The only people who ever got away left fast and never looked back. No questions, no goodbyes, just gone. I thought of the people before me, the ones who left in the middle of the night, who Mrs. Callahan had talked about. But I also thought of the little girl, the one who disappeared. They hadn't been fast enough. I shoved the coffee aside, suddenly nauseous. There has to be another way. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "You don't get it, do you?" My silence was answer enough. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "It's not the house that's haunted." My breath caught. "What?" She stared at me, expression grim. "It's him." The words sent a chill down my spine. The thing in that house, it's not tied to the walls or the floors. It doesn't need them. She shook her head. "It likes the house. It's been there a long time. But if it finds someone it really likes..." She didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew. I thought of the whisper in my ear, the hand on my chest, the way the air had felt thick, heavy, alive. I had left the house this morning, but I hadn't left him. That night, I booked a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't even want to think about the house. But as I lay in the stiff, unfamiliar bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The room was silent. No creaking floorboards. No wind rattling the windows. But still, I could feel something watching me. The air shifted. The temperature dropped. And then in the dead silence of the room, I heard it. A slow, dragging breath. Right next to my ear. I didn't move. I couldn't. The breath was so close, so impossibly near, that I could almost feel it brushing against my skin. My entire body locked up. My muscles frozen in place, as though my mind knew something I refused to accept. Asterisk if I acknowledged it. It would become real star, but it was already real. I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe it was a trick of exhaustion. Maybe my nerves were playing games with me. Maybe the bed dipped. A slow, deliberate shift in weight just beside my leg. A cold sweat broke out over my skin. My heart pounded so hard I swore the walls could hear it. Asterisk, this isn't happening. This isn't happening, asterisk. The air around me thickened, pressing against my chest like invisible hands, heavy and unmoving. And then something touched my arm. A slow, deliberate caress, trailing from my shoulder to my wrist. I choked back a sound, biting down so hard on my tongue that I tasted blood. The fingers lingered. Then in a soft, dragging motion, they pressed against my palm, like it was waiting for me to respond, like it was waiting for me to hold its hand. A tremor ran through me, but I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't react. And then the breath returned, low, raspy, right against my ear. Asterisk, you can't leave me. Asterisk, I broke. I threw myself out of bed, hitting the floor so hard my knee cracked against the tiles. Pain shot up my leg, but I didn't care. I scrambled backward, gasping for air, eyes darting wildly around the room. Nothing. The bed was empty. The door was still locked. The room was exactly as it had been when I checked in. But I knew it was there. Somewhere. Waiting. I grabbed my things and bolted. By the time I got back to the house, the sun was beginning to rise, the sky bleeding soft shades of pink and gold. I had driven aimlessly for hours, trying to convince myself that I was losing my mind, that I was exhausted, paranoid, overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't left it behind. It had followed me. Mrs. Callahan was outside again, watering her pitiful little patch of flowers. She took one look at me and sighed. Didn't take you long to come crawling back. I slammed the car door shut. It followed me. Her eyes flickered with something. Understanding, maybe even pity. But she didn't look surprised. They always do. I swallowed hard. What the hell is it? She shook her head. You don't want that answer. I do, I insisted. I need to know what I'm dealing with. She hesitated. Then, finally, she said, Emmett Graves was a sick man. I frowned. The original owner? She nodded. Didn't just build this place. He fed it. My stomach turned. Fed it. She lowered her voice. Emmett was obsessed with the other side. Thought there were things beyond the veil that could be called tamed. But that house, she glanced at it, eyes narrowing. That house called him first. I shuddered. So he performed rituals. Not just rituals, she said grimly. Sacrifices. A cold wave of nausea hit me. People went missing, she continued. Drifters. Strays. Ones no one would come looking for. Folks said Emmett invited them in, gave them food, a warm place to stay, then gave them to it. I swallowed hard. And no one stopped him? She scoffed. People tried. But by the time they figured it out, Emmett wasn't alive anymore. My skin prickled. What do you mean? She gave me a long, measured look. They found his body inside the house. Been dead for days. But people still saw him through the windows. Walking, watching, a shiver ran down my spine. The house didn't kill him, she said. It kept him. I felt sick. And you're saying it's still there? She nodded. It never left. It just waits. For what? She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. For someone like you. That night, I locked every door, every window, left every light on. But it didn't matter, because at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up. Not because of a sound, not because of a dream, but because something was standing at the foot of my bed, tall, still, watching. And when I finally dared to blink, it was closer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The figure at the foot of my bed was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel it staring at me, not with eyes. There were no eyes, no features, nothing but a shape, a mass of something standing impossibly still. The air around it was thick and wrong, like the room itself was bending inward, closing in. I squeezed my hands into fists, willing myself to stay calm. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was dreaming. Then it moved. Not a step, not a shift, just asterisk closer star, like the space between us had simply collapsed. A sharp, electric pulse shot through me. My body screamed to run, but I was frozen, locked in place by a terror so primal I couldn't even blink. The room was dead silent. No hum of the heater, no distant creak of settling wood. Then, in the crushing stillness, a whisper, asterisk, let me in, asterisk. A surge of panic ripped through me. I sat up so fast I nearly toppled off the bed, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The figure was gone. The room was empty. But I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone. The air still felt thick, heavy, as if something was waiting. I forced myself to move, to break the unnatural stillness. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on. The light was a weak comfort, but it was enough to get me moving. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone, checking the time. 3:14 a.m. I couldn't stay here. I shoved my feet into my sneakers and grabbed my jacket. My chest was tight, my breath uneven as I stumbled out of the bedroom and into the hallway. The house was silent. I was halfway to the front door when I stopped. The air shifted. Not a sound, just a feeling, like something waiting. I turned my head, heart pounding, and looked toward the darkened hallway leading to the basement door. The door that had been closed. It was open now, wide open, and the darkness inside was breathing. I ran. The diner was nearly empty when I stumbled inside, the bell above the door barely registering through the rush of blood in my ears. The waitress looked up. Her face fell. "You look like hell." I collapsed into a booth, my body shaking so badly I could barely sit upright. It was in my room. Her expression darkened. "It spoke to you." I nodded. She exhaled sharply and poured me a cup of coffee. "You need to leave." I tried, I whispered. She sat down across from me, lowering her voice. "It won't let you." I stared at her. "Then what do I do?" She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen as if making sure no one else was listening. "There's one way," she murmured. "One chance." I leaned in. "What is it?" Her eyes flickered with something close to fear. "You have to finish what Emmett started." A chill ran through me. "What does that mean?" She hesitated. Then, finally, "You have to open the door all the way." My stomach turned. "No, you don't have a choice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's already claimed you. You either let it in, or it takes you anyway." I shook my head, my pulse thundering. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." She grabbed a napkin and scrawled something on it, sliding it across the table. "An address." "You need to see him," she said. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "The last one who got out." I sat in my car, gripping the napkin so tightly it crumpled in my fist. An address, a name, Michael Hale, the only person who had ever escaped. I didn't know if I believed it. I didn't know if I could trust her. But as I sat in the dark, staring at the dimly lit road ahead, I knew I didn't have a choice. I started the car and drove toward the only hope I had left. The drive was long, stretching through empty roads and nameless towns. My fingers were tight around the steering wheel, knuckles pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. The address the waitress had given me was nearly an hour away, deep in a rural stretch of land where streetlights were scarce and the night seemed thicker somehow. Michael Hale, the last one who got out. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a crazed, paranoid man living in a shack covered in salt and crosses. Maybe someone who wouldn't even open the door for me. Or maybe, just maybe, someone who would tell me I wasn't losing my mind. The thought was almost comforting. Almost. The radio was off, but I kept hearing things anyway, scratching in the back of my mind, like something trying to be heard but just out of reach. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I already knew I wouldn't like what I saw. The further I drove, the colder I felt. Then, finally, I saw it. A house. Small. Isolated. A single porch light flickering against the blackness of the surrounding trees. I pulled into the dirt driveway, my headlights cutting across a rusted truck and a mailbox leaning at a precarious angle. My heart pounded as I shut the car off. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me. Then I got out. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something stale, like old books left open too long. I approached the porch, my footsteps muffled against the wooden planks. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again harder. Still nothing. A part of me considered leaving, just turning around, getting back in my car, and pretending none of this had ever happened. Then the door creaked open. Not all the way, just enough for a single eye to peer through the darkness. A man, older than I expected, deep lines around his eyes. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, "You shouldn't have come." My stomach dropped. "Please," I said. I need help. A pause. A hesitation. Then the door opened wider. Come in. I stepped inside. The house was small but cluttered. Books stacked in uneven piles. Newspaper clippings pinned to the walls. The air was thick, as if it hadn't been aired out in years. Michael shut the door behind me and locked it. Then he turned to face me. You saw it, didn't you? I swallowed hard. Yes. His jaw tightened. And it spoke to you? Yes. His expression darkened. Then you're already marked. A chill crept up my spine. What does that mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past me and sat down at an old wooden table, motioning for me to do the same. I hesitated, then followed. You need to listen carefully, he said, because you don't have much time. I nodded, my pulse hammering. He took a slow breath. The house doesn't just haunt people. It chooses them. I stiffened. He continued. It doesn't want to scare you away. It wants you to stay long enough for it to get inside you, long enough for it to take hold. A cold weight settled in my chest. Take hold. His gaze was steady. It needs a body. The words felt sharp, cutting through the fog of my fear. A body? I echoed. Michael nodded. It happened to Emmett, the man before you. Emmett, the name from the journal. I leaned forward. What happened to him? Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. He let it in. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, I whispered, what happened to him? Michael exhaled through his nose. No one knows. He disappeared. The house was found empty. But the next person who moved in, he stopped, his throat working. What? I pressed. He met my eyes. They saw him. A shiver ran through me. Saw him. Michael nodded. Not alive. Not him. Just his shape. A suffocating silence settled in the room. Then Michael stood. You need to leave, he said. I tried, I whispered. He shook his head. Not like that. You can't just run. The house won't let you. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. Then what do I do? Michael turned, walked to a cabinet, and pulled something out. A book. Old. Leather-bound. The edges worn and cracked. He set it on the table and slid it toward me. You need to finish what Emmett started, he said. I stared at the book, my breath coming shallow. What is this? His gaze was steady. The ritual? My blood ran cold. Finish it, he said, or you'll end up just like him. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled as I reached for the book, my fingertips brushing against the cover. It felt cold, almost alive. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know, but I had no choice. I took a deep breath and turned the first page. The book felt wrong in my hands. The leather was smooth but too cold, as if it had been sitting in a frozen room for decades. My fingertips tingled the moment I touched it, and for a fleeting second, I swore I felt something shift beneath the cover, like breath trapped inside the pages. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. Michael watched me closely, his jaw tight. Start at the beginning, he said. I swallowed and flipped the cover open. The pages were yellowed, brittle at the edges. Ink bled in places. The handwriting frantic, uneven, like someone had been writing in a hurry or in fear. The first words hit me like a punch to the chest. Asterisk to the one who finds this run. If you still can. Asterisk. My breath stilled. I glanced up at Michael, but he only nodded for me to keep going. The next lines were even worse. Asterisk. It knows when you're reading this. It watches. It waits. And if you let it, it will use you, just like it used me. Asterisk. A chill traced my spine. This was Emmett, wasn't it? Michael's face was grim. Keep reading. I swallowed hard and turned the page. The words spiraled into desperation. Descriptions of shadows that moved on their own, voices whispering things he couldn't understand. Dreams that felt like something else was inside them. And then, asterisk, it needs a door. Asterisk, I frowned. What does that mean? Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. Look at the next page. I turned it and felt my stomach drop. A drawing, roughly sketched, but unmistakable. It was the door from my basement. My fingers tightened on the book. I sealed it. Emmett had written beneath the drawing, asterisk, but it won't hold forever. If you are reading this, then it's waking up. And if it gets out, God help us all. Asterisk. My vision blurred at the edges. The scratching I'd heard, the feeling of something waiting behind that door. I was never imagining it. Michael exhaled slowly. That door wasn't always there, he said. The original owner, Graham. He built it himself. Sealed something inside. The name rang in my head. Graham. I remembered the journal I had found. The obsession with rituals. The paranoia. He locked something away, Michael continued. But the thing is, he looked at me, his expression dark. Locks break. I closed the book slowly, trying to suppress the tremor in my hands. How do I stop it? Michael hesitated. Then he stood and moved toward a shelf, pulling out another book, thicker, older, with a deep gash across the spine. There's a ritual, he said. It has to be done before it fully wakes up, before it gets strong enough to break through completely. My pulse pounded in my ears. And if I don't do it, Michael's jaw tightened. You won't be you anymore. The words sank into my bones like ice. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Michael placed the book in front of me. You have one night, he said. I stared at him. What? He didn't blink. If you wait any longer, it'll be too late. The walls of the room felt like they were pressing in. My breath came shallow, my mind racing. I wasn't ready, but I didn't have a choice. I picked up the book, its weight pressing into my palms. Tell me what I have to do. Michael exhaled and sat down, leaning forward. You need to go back to the house, he said. And you need to finish what Emmett started. A heavy silence filled the room. And in the distance, barely audible through the thick, suffocating air, a single creak, like a footstep, only it came from inside the house. Michael's face paled. I turned my head, my heart hammering. The air had shifted, colder, denser, and then the light bulb above us flickered. Once, twice, then died completely. We were plunged into darkness. A breath, slow and shuddering, echoed in the room, but it wasn't mine, and it wasn't Michael's. Something else was here, waiting, watching, and for the first time, I realized I might not make it through the night. The darkness in the room felt alive. It pressed against my skin, seeping into the cracks of my thoughts. Every breath I took felt heavier, as if the very air was thickening, pulling at my lungs. My heartbeat was deafening in the silence that followed the flicker of the light bulb. I could almost hear it, slow, deliberate, like footsteps approaching from far away. I froze. Michael? My voice sounded small in the thick, suffocating dark. No answer. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, expanding and contracting, as though they were aware of me, watching me, waiting for something. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to get out, but my feet were rooted to the floor. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was nothing, only the heavy darkness. The kind of dark that felt like it was pressing against my skin, crawling beneath it. I looked back at Michael. He was gone. Panic surged through me, my breath quickening, my hands trembling. I stood up, reaching for the door. But before I could get a step closer, something cold brushed against my arm. Icy fingers that sent a shock of fear coursing through me. I recoiled, gasping. Nothing. I had to get out. I had to go back to the house. I turned and ran. The chill followed me, clinging to my skin, but I couldn't look back. The house. I had to go to the house. The car ride felt like it took hours, though it was only a few minutes. My mind raced, repeating the same mantra over and over, get to the house, finish what Emmett started. But I knew deep down that whatever was waiting for me in that house was not something I could just finish. The ritual, whatever it was, couldn't protect me from what had already been set in motion. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, old, quiet, unsettling in the way it always was. But tonight, something felt different. It was as if the house was waiting for me, holding its breath in anticipation. I stepped out of the car, the sound of gravel crunching beneath, my shoes loud in the silence. The night air was thick, heavy, almost oppressive. I glanced back at the car, then toward the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. Panic flared inside me, but I forced myself to breathe. I pulled harder. Finally, the door creaked open. The hallway was pitch black, the same as when I first stepped inside. I hesitated for a moment, but something, an unseen force, urged me forward. I couldn't wait any longer. As I walked through the house, the air seemed to grow colder with every step. It wrapped itself around me, tight and suffocating. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, each step a reminder that I was not alone. Something was watching me. The cold became unbearable. I wrapped my arms around myself for warmth, but it did nothing to stop the creeping chill that sank into my bones. I reached the basement door, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at it. It seemed different now, somehow more alive than before. I had no choice. I had to open it. The door swung open with a loud screech, and the smell hit me first, a rancid, musty odor that burned my nose and made my stomach turn. It was worse than before, so much worse. I descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the stillness. The cold seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on me from all sides. When I reached the bottom, I stopped. The door, it was still there. I took a step forward, my hands clammy, my breath shallow. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something shifting behind the door. A faint scraping noise, like something or someone was moving on the other side. My heart skipped a beat. It knows I'm here. The whisper from earlier came back to me. The thing, it was waiting. I backed up slowly, my eyes never leaving the door. My fingers trembled as I reached into my pocket for the journal. I pulled it out, hands shaking, and flipped to the page where Michael had said the ritual would be. I could barely read the words. They were smudged and faded, but I could make out enough. The door had to be sealed, but not with just any simple lock. There had to be a symbol, a binding, something to hold whatever was on the other side in place. I turned to face the door again, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do. The ritual would only work if I closed it. The door, the presence, asterisk completely star. But as I moved closer to the door, I heard something behind me, slow and steady. Footsteps. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my chest. And there, standing at the top of the stairs, was the figure of a man, shrouded in shadow, watching me. I couldn't breathe. My body froze. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. And then, the figure took a step forward. A cold gust of wind slammed into me, pushing me toward the door. Someone, asterisk wanted out star, and I was running out of time. I stumbled back, my body crashing into the wall with a force that left me breathless. My heart was pounding so loudly that it felt as if it might burst from my chest. The figure at the top of the stairs moved closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring my fear. The air grew colder with each step it took toward me, and I could feel the chill seep into my bones, gnawing at me like something alive. I couldn't move. The words I needed to say, the scream that should have escaped my throat, were trapped inside me. My body had frozen. A prisoner to whatever presence was now looming in front of me. It wasn't a man. At least not anymore. The figure was too still, too unnatural. I could feel its eyes on me, eyes that weren't even there, yet I could sense them drilling into the very core of my soul. It was as if the thing had been waiting for me, watching me all this time, biding its time for this moment. I couldn't take it. My chest felt tight, suffocated by the sheer weight of what was happening. I turned away from the figure and ran. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I bolted down the hallway, the air behind me growing heavier and colder. I could hear the footsteps now, much closer than before, echoing in the narrow corridor. They weren't my own. They were something else, something far more sinister. My fingers fumbled for the light switch, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But as my hand brushed against the wall, the house seemed to shift. The light flickered, then went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. Panic gripped me like a vice. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I had to. The whisper again, low, chilling, right behind me. I whipped around, my heart lurching, but nothing. The darkness was all-consuming, and the only sound was my ragged breath. I could feel something in the room with me, just out of sight, something circling, waiting. I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. Instead, there was a soft, dragging noise, like something heavy being dragged across the floor, and it was getting closer. My hands shook as I reached for the doorknob to the front room. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I threw the door open and stepped into the larger hall. The cold air slapped me in the face, the icy fingers of whatever haunted this place digging into my skin, making me shiver uncontrollably. I had to go back to the basement, the journal, the ritual. My legs felt like lead as I moved toward the stairs, but every part of my body screamed at me to stop. My instincts told me to leave, to run far away from this place, to never come back. But the thought of leaving unfinished business gnawed at me. It was too late for that. I had to seal the door. But when I reached the top of the stairs, the door to the basement was wide open. I hadn't opened it. My chest tightened and I swallowed hard. The faint scent of something rotten clung to the air. I could see shadows moving inside, but the darkness made it impossible to tell what they were. The coldness from before was now a biting, suffocating presence that seemed to crawl over me, sinking deeper into my bones. I had to go in. I had to do what I came here to do. I grabbed the edge of the door and pulled it open, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. The cold that greeted me was like a slap to the face. I stepped inside, my breath shallow, and I could feel something watching me from the depths of the basement. I heard the whisper again. It was clearer now, coming from behind me. "You shouldn't have come." My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human, not anymore. It was distorted, twisted, as if the words had been ripped from somewhere far beyond this world. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I knew what I'd see if I did. Instead, I moved forward, down the stairs, the light from the lantern in my hand casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The basement stretched out before me, its corners lost in darkness. The journal. I needed to find it. The pages of the journal were ragged old and stained with something I didn't want to think about. I could feel the presence behind me now, pressing against me like a wall of ice. It was moving closer, and I had no time to lose. I rifled through the pages, reading the scrawled handwriting of the man who had once lived here. He had been obsessed with the occult, rituals, dark forces that he believed could open doors to other realms. He believed that the house itself was a conduit, a gateway, and he had been right. The door in the basement wasn't just a door. It was a portal. The journal detailed a ritual, one that could seal the door. It was a complex series of chants and symbols, the kind of thing that could only be done by someone who understood the ancient magic that ran through the house. But I had no choice. I had to try. I followed the instructions, my hands trembling as I marked the symbols on the floor, the walls, anywhere I could. The coldness in the room grew, and the shadows danced around me, teasing, mocking. The whispers grew louder, becoming unintelligible, a chorus of voices layered on top of each other. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and slow, dragging against the floor. I turned. It was right behind me. The figure, the thing. Its breath was icy against my neck, and I could feel its presence, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. My legs gave out beneath me, and I felt the floor, my hands still clutching the journal. Something cold wrapped around my wrist, pulling me upward. I could feel the darkness closing in, could sense the portal growing more powerful, more alive. And then with a single violent tug, I was pulled into the dark. The darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I was still on the floor of the basement or if I had been transported to some other place, somewhere far beyond this world. My senses were overloaded with a cold so deep that it made my skin feel like it was burning. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could hear was a rush of blood in my ears, and that whisper, that same distorted voice, lingering just behind me, curling around my thoughts like smoke. You shouldn't have come. The words echoed in my mind, rattling my very being. I tried to open my eyes, but the darkness was thick, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. The air was dense, heavy with an unnatural weight that made it hard to breathe. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I had no idea which way to go. The ground beneath me felt like it was shifting, like the house itself was alive, twisting and groaning. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my throat. It was as if my voice had been stolen from me. And then there was a shift, a subtle one at first. The darkness seemed to recede just a little, allowing me to make out vague shapes in the blackness. The walls were still there, cold and unforgiving, but they seemed farther away now, as if the space around me had stretched and warped. The whisper came again, louder this time, almost close enough to touch. You're not alone here. I jerked my head around, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but there was nothing. Nothing but the thick, pressing darkness that had taken hold of everything. I felt it before I saw it, the cold, clammy sensation of something brushing against my skin. Something that shouldn't have been there. A touch, like the passing of a hand, but cold as ice, and then another. Something was moving around me, skimming my arms, my legs, my face, but every time I tried to catch it, it vanished, slipping away like smoke. The sensation grew stronger, more insistent, and I realized I was no longer standing in place. My feet were moving on their own, taking slow, deliberate steps forward. It was as if the darkness itself was guiding me, pulling me along like a marionette. I could no longer fight it. Every part of me wanted to resist, to tear myself away from whatever was pulling me forward, but I was trapped, caught in this twisted web. I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched, trying to find something solid to grasp, but there was nothing. The floor beneath me seemed to ripple like water, and my footing was unstable. I took a step, then another, but my body felt heavier with each movement, weighed down by something far greater than gravity. Then I saw it, a flicker in the dark, just beyond the reach of my sight. It was brief, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. Something moved there, a shape, something far too large to be just a shadow. I took another step, and then another. The flicker came again, this time clearer. It was a figure, tall, unnaturally tall with long, twisted limbs that seemed to stretch and contract with the ebbing darkness. Its head was large and misshapen, its face obscured by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching me. I froze. I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, paralyzed by fear, as the figure slowly advanced toward me. Each step it took seemed to make the air grow colder, the darkness thicker. I could feel it closing in, surrounding me, like a vice tightening around my chest. Then the whispers returned, a chorus of voices, each one more distinct than the last. Leave. Now, it was no longer just one voice. It was many, layered over one another, creating a cacophony of distorted sounds. I couldn't make sense of them, but the tone was clear. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a warning. It was an order, and I knew that if I didn't obey, whatever this thing was would tear me apart. I had to get out, but the more I tried to move, the heavier the air became, pressing against me, suffocating me. My chest tightened, my throat closed. I could hardly breathe. The figure was closer now, only a few feet away. Its presence was overwhelming, a darkness so deep that it seemed to consume everything in its path. The whispers were all around me, growing louder and more frantic. The cold was unbearable, biting into my skin, sinking deeper with every breath I took. It was right in front of me now. I could feel it, the weight of it pressing against me, like it was trying to swallow me whole. And then a voice, clear and unrelenting, broke through the chaos of whispers. "Do you see now?" I tried to answer, but the words were stuck in my throat. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. "Do you understand?" The voice was familiar, though I couldn't place it. It was a voice from the journal, the one that had warned me about the curse, about the door, about the thing waiting on the other side. The figure reached out a hand. It was long, too long, stretching toward me with fingers that seemed to bend and twist unnaturally, like they were made of something other than flesh. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and I could see the veins beneath it pulsing alive. I couldn't move, couldn't react. I was frozen in place, staring at the hand as it inched closer, and then the fingers brushed my face. The coldness was overwhelming, like ice-cold water poured straight into my veins. It burned, but not in the way a burn should. This was deeper, more invasive. It felt like it was reaching into my very soul, pulling something from within me. I gasped, trying to pull away, but my body refused to move. The whispers had turned into screams now, voices crying out in pain, in terror, in agony. But they weren't just sounds, they were feelings. Every scream, every cry of desperation pulsed through me, sinking into my chest, my heart. I could feel the weight of every lost soul, every tortured existence, pressing against me. And then, with a sudden jolt, the darkness shifted again. The pressure on my chest lifted, and for a moment I was free. Free to breathe, free to move. I gasped for air, stumbling backward. The figure in front of me was gone. The cold had faded. The whispers had silenced. But it wasn't over. I could still feel it. The presence. The thing. It was there, lurking just out of reach. I turned and ran. The house was still dark, the air thick with the remnants of whatever had happened. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, each sound echoing in the silence like a warning. I didn't know how much longer I could keep running. I didn't know if the house would let me go, or if it was just playing with me, waiting for me to make a mistake, to turn around. But I had to leave. I had to get out. I didn't dare look back. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath ragged and uneven. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the house itself was trying to hold me in place. The hallway stretched on forever, the doors and windows all blending into one long, endless corridor. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick with every breath I took. I reached the stairs. They were steep, creaking under my weight, threatening to give way at any moment. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't. There was something at the bottom of that darkened staircase, something waiting for me, something I knew I couldn't outrun. I shoved the door open with all my might. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, a brief moment of relief. But the house, the house, was still there, its presence lingering in the space around me, in the very air I breathed. I wanted to run out into the night, to leave it all behind, but something told me that no matter how far I went, I would never escape it. I stood there, frozen on the doorstep, unsure of what to do next. My eyes scanned the darkness beyond the porch, the familiar surroundings of the yard now feeling alien, like they were part of a nightmare. The trees swayed in the wind, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. And that feeling, the feeling that something was watching me, was still there, tugging at the back of my mind. I heard it then, the sound, footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking behind me, keeping pace. My heart stopped in my chest. I whipped around, but no one was there. Nothing but the empty, desolate stretch of yard behind me. But the footsteps, they were there, getting closer, echoing in my ears, louder with each passing second. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What was happening? Was it real? Or was I losing my mind? I had to leave. I had to go. But I didn't know where to go. The streets were quiet, silent, and the whole town felt empty, like it had been abandoned long ago. There was nowhere safe anymore. I glanced at the house once more. The windows were dark, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow move behind them. Just a flicker, barely there, but enough to send a chill down my spine. The whispering was back too, soft, like a distant murmur. Come back. I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved, as if the house was pulling me, forcing me to turn back, to go inside. My fingers gripped the doorknob, and for a moment I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was imagining everything? What if it was just the house settling? But deep down, I knew the truth. The door creaked open of its own accord, as if the house itself was welcoming me back. I didn't have time to fight it. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped as soon as I crossed the threshold. It was colder than it had ever been before, a biting chill that numbed my fingers and toes. I shivered violently, rubbing my arms in a futile attempt to warm up. The house was silent now, too silent. The air was thick with tension, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The shadows were longer, stretching across the walls like dark tendrils, reaching out to grab me. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't let whatever was in this house consume me. I had to leave, asterisk again star. But the stairs were still there, the dark hallway still looming in front of me. I could feel the weight of it all, pulling at my mind, dragging me back toward that cursed place. I took a step forward, but something stopped me. A noise, a faint scrape, like nails on wood. It came from the direction of the basement. I froze, the blood draining from my face. It was impossible. I had just come from there. There was nothing left down there but the darkness. But the sound came again, louder this time, scraping, dragging, as though something was moving down in the basement, something alive, something that had been waiting. I turned on my heel and bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I reached for the handle, it slammed shut in my face. I backed away, breathless, panic setting in. It was locked. How? How could it be locked? I hadn't even touched it. I ran to the windows. All of them closed, tight, locked. The air around me grew colder still, colder than it had ever been. The floor beneath my feet felt slick, almost like ice. A cold gust of wind swept to the house, and I heard it again, the scraping sound. It was closer now. In the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow, skittering across the floor, fast, too fast. I turned to face it. The thing in the corner, it wasn't human. It was something else, something twisted. Its body was contorted in unnatural ways. Its limbs stretched too long, too thin. Its face was a blank, hollow mask, a void where eyes should have been. The air around me thickened, the pressure building until it felt like my chest would explode. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and erratic. It hissed, its breath a foul, rancid stench that burned my nostrils. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the terror that flooded my veins. Then I heard the whisper again, asterisk, you can't leave. Not now. Not ever. asterisk, the creature moved closer, its arms reaching toward me. I could feel the coldness of its touch, even from a distance. I closed my eyes, desperate to block it out, to escape, but when I opened them again, it was gone. The house was silent once more. I didn't know if it had ever been real, or if it was just another trick of the mind. But the fear, it was real. It gripped me, held me in place, and I knew that I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever had been haunting me, whatever was keeping me trapped inside this house, I wasn't going to wait around to find out what it wanted. I ran through the house, through the hallways, through the rooms, trying door after door, but they were all locked. The windows were sealed shut. There was no way out. And then I heard it again, the scraping sound closer now. It was coming from behind me. I didn't have to look to know it was there. I could feel it, feel its presence. I kept running until the house began to collapse around me. The walls groaned under the weight of something unseen, the house itself seemingly shuddering with a life of its own. Each step I took sent vibrations through the floorboards, and the creaking sound grew louder, more deafening, as if the house was struggling to keep itself together. My breathing grew more erratic, my heart pounding in my chest as panic consumed me. The shadows around me seemed to stretch, moving closer as though they were alive, just waiting for me to make a wrong move. I tried the door to the living room. Locked. Another door, locked. I turned to the windows, desperately tugging at the curtains and pulling on the handles, but they were sealed shut. Everything was closing in, trapping me in this suffocating maze of rooms. Thud. The noise came from upstairs, heavy, like footsteps dragging across the floor. It was slow, deliberate, and it filled me with a deep, primal fear. I didn't want to go up there. I didn't want to see what was making that noise, but my feet carried me forward. I couldn't stop myself. I had to face it. I had to know. I moved toward the stairs, my legs trembling beneath me. The old wood creaked under my weight, groaning with each step I took. The air was thick with tension, thick with the sense that something was waiting for me just beyond the shadows. The noise continued above me, louder now, closer. It was like it was coming for me. I reached the top of the stairs and stood there, staring down the dark hallway. The house stretched on endlessly, the rooms on either side filled with emptiness. The silence was almost worse than the noise. It pressed in on me, heavy, suffocating. A door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it swallowing everything. It was the only one left unlocked. I knew where I had to go. I stepped forward, each step making the floor groan beneath me. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming mist in front of my face. My skin prickled with cold, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was something else. Something was there with me, watching me, waiting for me. I reached the door. The cold air from inside the room rushed out, hitting me in the face. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what lay beyond it pressing against my chest. But I had no choice. I had to go in. I pushed the door open, and the room was like nothing I had seen before. It wasn't a bedroom, nor was it a typical room in the house. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn hastily in what looked like blood. There were candles, black candles, arranged in a circle on the floor, their flames flickering in the draft, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. In the center of the room, there was a desk. Papers were scattered across it, old and yellowed with age. A journal lay open, its pages filled with the same strange symbols. I approached the desk cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something told me that if I read those pages, I would learn things I wasn't meant to know. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to see. I reached out and grabbed the journal. As soon as my fingers touched the paper, a cold wind rushed through the room, slamming the door behind me. I spun around, panic rising in my chest. But the room was still, eerily silent. I could only hear the thumping of my own heartbeat in my ears. I opened the journal. The first few pages were nothing but ramblings, scribbles that didn't make sense. But as I flipped further into the book, the writing became clearer, more deliberate, and the words made my stomach churn. Asterisk, the door is open. They are coming, asterisk. The words were repeated over and over again, growing more frantic with each page. My hands trembled as I continued reading, feeling a sick sense of dread growing within me. Asterisk, the ritual must be completed. The door must remain open, asterisk. My mind reeled. The door. The door. What door? What was the writer talking about? And who had been here before me? What had they summoned? Then I saw it, a sketch, drawn hastily in the corner of the page. It was a drawing of the very house I was standing in, the very room I was in now. But there was something wrong with it. The house was twisted, distorted, as if the lines were bending and stretching beyond their natural limits. And in the center of the room, a shadow loomed, an unnatural, dark figure that seemed to be watching me, waiting for me. The shadow looked familiar. It felt like it had always been there, watching, lurking in the corners of my mind. I closed the journal with a snap, the sound echoing in the room, and felt the weight of the house pressing in on me. The temperature dropped again, colder than before, and I could feel the presence behind me. Closer now, closer than ever. I didn't want to turn around, but I had no choice. I had to know. I had to face it. Slowly, I turned my head. It was there. The figure, the shadow. It was standing in the doorway behind me, tall and thin, its features obscured by darkness. I could feel its gaze on me, feel the weight of its presence like a physical pressure against my chest. And then it spoke. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come. Asterisk, the voice was a whisper, but it was loud in my mind, filling every corner of my thoughts. It was cold, lifeless. The words felt like they were pulling me toward the darkness, toward something I couldn't escape. I backed away, my feet stumbling as I tried to run, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, trapped by the cold, trapped by the thing in the doorway. It took a step forward, just one, but it was enough to send a wave of terror crashing over me. I screamed. I didn't know what else to do, but it was too late. The room was closing in. The shadows were wrapping around me, suffocating me. And the last thing I saw before everything went dark was that figure, its face still hidden, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. I couldn't escape. The darkness consumed everything, my senses, my thoughts, my very breath. I tried to scream, but no sound came. It felt like I was drowning in an endless void. The figure's presence loomed over me, cold and unrelenting. Every inch of the room, the house, seemed to close in on me until there was nothing but the echo of my own fear. I woke up. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't peaceful. I jolted upright, gasping for air, my body soaked with sweat. I was still in the room, still standing by the desk with the journal in my hand, but everything was silent. The cold air was gone. The presence was gone. The room was still. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it real? Was it a nightmare? My heart raced, and I could still feel the lingering cold, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. The journal. I glanced down at the pages, now closed in my hands. The symbols, the warnings, did they mean something? Had I been marked? Had I opened something that wasn't meant to be disturbed? The house was quiet, but I knew better now. I knew that the calm was just a lull before the storm. Whatever had been waiting for me, it wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until it had what it wanted. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. The door was still closed. I reached for the handle. The floor creaked beneath my weight as I pulled it open, and that's when I saw it. The shadow in the hallway. It was barely visible, but I could feel it, the weight of it hanging in the air. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a thing. It was something much worse, something that belonged in the dark corners of nightmares, waiting for the right moment to strike. I turned, my mind racing, but when I tried to flee, I felt the pressure again, the suffocating grip of the house tightening around me. The shadows twisted and curled like living things, pulling me in, forcing me to face whatever was lurking in the dark. I ran. I don't know how long I ran for. I don't know if I ever made it out. All I know is that I couldn't stop. I couldn't leave fast enough. The door. I had to get to the door. The front door. It was locked. The windows? Sealed shut. I screamed again, the panic rising in my chest, but no one could hear me. No one would ever hear me again. And then, as I turned to look back, something moved in the corner of my eye. It was small, unnoticeable, just a flicker of movement. But I knew. The house hadn't let me leave. It was waiting for the next person to come, to move in, to open the door once more. The house was alive, and its hunger would never be sated. I ran again, and this time I didn't stop. Not for the footsteps behind me. Not for the cold hand that reached out to grab my shoulder. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I finally made it out, when I finally stepped beyond the threshold, I collapsed on the ground outside. I could still hear the house. I could still feel it. Its pull, its weight, its curse. And then, as I stumbled away, I heard it again. The whisper, soft at first, but growing louder as I walked further into the night. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come. Asterisk. And that's where the story ends, or perhaps begins. The house still stands, unchanged, unforgiving. And I know that someday, someone else will come, and the door will open again.